Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review of Equinox, which are episodes 26 of Season 5 and episode 1 of Season 6 of Star Trek Voyager. This video is a part of Star Trek Week, where I will be reviewing episodes of Star Trek all week, as requested by my viewers. This episode was requested by Isaiah Williams. So Equinox is a two-part episode where Voyager encounters another Starfleet vessel in the Delta Quadrant, the Uss Equinox, commanded by Captain Ransom and his first officer, Commander Burke, who had had a prior relationship with B'Elanna Torres during her short time at Starfleet Academy. The Equinox was also brought to the Delta Quadrant by the Caretaker 5 years earlier, but has had a very different journey, as the Equinox is a much smaller and less advanced ship that had more difficult time in the Delta Quadrant and are currently under constant attack by subspace aliens that open rifts within the ship to attack whenever the shields are down. While Janeway attempts to help the crew repair the ship and fight off these aliens, they slowly learn these things aren't as they appear, and eventually they come to the revelation that Captain Ransom attacked these subspace aliens first and killed a great many of them in order to generate a fuel source that would allow them to return to Earth. This, of course, is unacceptable to Janeway, who arrests Ransom and his crew for genocide of an alien species. However, the Equinox EMH attacks the Doctor and steals his mobile emitter and assumes his identity. There, he successfully helps the Equinox crew escape, who return to their ship, where they get away with 7 of 9 and the Doctor as prisoners as they leave Voyager to be attacked by the subspace aliens. However, when they attempt to use the enhanced warp drive to get home, they found 7 of 9 has locked them out with a decryption code, and when she refuses to give them the code, Ransom responds by disabling the Doctor's ethical subroutines and orders him to forcibly remove the codes from her, a procedure that would leave her brain dead. Meanwhile, Janeway goes on a bloodthirsty revenge quest to get Ransom and his crew, as she takes his betrayal of what everything Starfleet stands for personally. She eventually catches up to them and captures 2 Equinox crewmen, and she threatens and attempts to kill one of them for not cooperating, and when Chakotay stops her, she relieves him of duty. Janeway later finds the alien race that first introduced the Equinox to the subspace aliens, who help her communicate with them, and they reach an agreement where they stop attacking her ship, and she agrees to deliver the Equinox crew to them so they can kill them. However, when Voyager finally catches up to the Equinox, Ransom has had a change of heart and decides to surrender to Voyager, but Commander Burke stages a mutiny and takes over the ship, and with the help of their EMH acting as a spy on Voyager, manages to penetrate Voyager's shields. However, Ransom gets help of his own and escapes custody and manages to send 7 and the Doctor back to Voyager, where the Doctor takes out the Equinox's EMH. Ransom also disables shields and vital sections of the ship, allowing the subspace aliens to rapidly damage the Equinox. Commander Burke and the mutineers are killed by the aliens while they try to flee to a shuttlecraft, and Captain Ransom goes down with his ship as he gets it a safe distance from Voyager before it explodes. Janeway and Chakotay mend fences, and all returns to normal. So these episodes had a lot of potential, and it does manage to pay off on some of it, but in other cases it fails to deliver. It's an extremely interesting premise, and I remember being completely enthralled when the first part was released. However, when subjected to more intense scrutiny, this two-parter doesn't quite hold up. In addition, like so many Star Trek two-parters that span 2 seasons, the second part fails to deliver on the promise of the first. I think this was a common occurrence with Trek's tendency to end a season on a cliffhanger episode and start the next season with the conclusion to that cliffhanger. They reportedly never knew what would happen in the second part and would break for summer before coming up with the resolution to that story. While this worked well the first time they employed it for the two-part of the Best of Both Worlds, which is seen by many, well not me, but by many others, as one of the best episodes of Star Trek ever, This actually tends to result in the second part failing in pretty much every other case to live up to the potential of the first part, like in two-parters like Time's Arrow, Descent, or Basics. And I think this definitely applies to this episode, as I found the second part quite disappointing, and it definitely failed to live up to the potential of the first part. But more than that, it very obviously changed course partway through, and the second part doesn't quite follow the setup established in the first part. Ransom was steadfast that they needed to go through with their plan to return home, but then all of a sudden in the second part, Ransom was the one having doubts and ultimately ended up wanting to surrender to Voyager, whereas Commander Burke was the one who stubbornly refused to give up on their plan, whereas in the first part, Commander Burke was the one shown as having doubts, and Ransom was the one who was steadfast in the plans. And also the first part ended with a cliffhanger of Janeway being attacked by an alien, but the second part began where that ended up being nothing, and Janeway was fine, but Chakotay was the one who was injured by an alien. And it was obvious that they were setting out for Janeway to be the one who was attacked, and the way that they shamelessly changed tactics like that was a bit ridiculous. And while for the most part I did really like the first part, as it set up an interesting dynamic of having a Starfleet vessel be the enemy for once, there were a few problems I had with it as well, such as when it came time to explain why the Equinox was in the Delta Quadrant, this was glossed over by Janeway, explaining that Voyager was brought to the Delta Quadrant by an alien known as the Caretaker, and when she said Caretaker, Ransom said it at the same time as her, indicating that they were both brought there by the Caretaker. But that doesn't actually make sense. If the Equinox was brought to the Delta Quadrant by the Caretaker, then why weren't they there when Voyager and the Maquis ship arrived? Why did they simply leave? Why didn't they try to use the array to get home like Voyager would have done had they not had to destroy it in order to save the Accompas? And the whole point of the Caretaker was to gather ships from all over the galaxy to study different species to see if one were compatible with him, so why would he need two Starfleet ships? I might have been able to forgive these inconsistencies if they even attempted to explain them away, but instead they simply had Janeway said, "Oh well, compare notes later," and they never touched on it again. I'm sorry, but that is simply bad and lazy writing. That's not just a minute detail. It's the heart of having another Starfleet ship in the Delta Quadrant, and to simply gloss over it like that is simply unforgivable. Personally, I think they would have been better off coming up with another explanation as to how the Equinox got trapped in the Delta Quadrant, trapped in a wormhole, an experiment gone wrong, something, anything. To simply mutter about the Caretaker, which in fact makes no logical sense, is definitely the very definition of lazy writing. As for the second part, there were many problems I had with this episode, none the least being how easily Ransom turned the Doctor evil. This I totally did not buy. In fact, I would say ruined the whole episode for me. So in the first part, when we find the Equinox EMH, we learn he helped kill these creatures and come up with a way to use the remains as fuel, and when questioned on how an EMH could act in such a way, they explained it away by saying that they disabled his ethical subroutines. And that's fine. That all makes perfect sense. It also makes sense why the Equinox Doctor would do things like free the Equinox crew and work as a spy on board Voyager, as he would feel more of a devotion to that crew. What doesn't make any sense is that the Voyager Doctor was totally defiant and refused to help Ransom, but all Ransom needed to do was disable the Doctor's ethical subroutines, and he was instantly, okay, Captain, what do you want me to do? But that makes no freaking sense! Just because his ethical subroutines were disabled, it wouldn't instantly manufacture a loyalty to Ransom that wasn't there before. Sure, but because of his ethics were disabled, he wouldn't have any moral objections to lobotomizing Seven, but he'd have personal objections. He still knows her, and he's still friends with her, and has a devotion to the Voyager crew, not the Equinox crew. So therefore, a more logical reaction for the Doctor after Ransom disabled his ethical subroutines would be for him to try to kill Ransom, because without ethics, he'd have no moral compunction of killing, but it wouldn't change the fact that he's devoted to the Voyager crew and that he doesn't like Ransom for attacking his crew and threatening his friend. And the way, they brush it off at the end of the episode, once the Doctor and Seven are safely aboard Voyager, where the Doctor's like, well, it's a shame to know all one needs to do is flip a switch to turn me evil, and Seven kind of laughs it off. Ha ha, you tried to kill me, ha ha. But that's ridiculous! And the whole thing is ridiculous, as it shouldn't be as easy as flipping a switch to turn him evil, because the Doctor has clearly been established to be more complex than that, but I suppose, they had to simplify him when it serves the purpose of the plot. That's simply unforgivable and an outrageous plot hole. However, the other aspect of Part 2 that bothers me is they turn Janeway into this completely unreasonable mad woman bent on revenge, and when Chakotay tries to speak reason to her, she simply relieves him of duty. And when Tuvok started speaking reason to her, she almost relieved him of duty. How is this okay? And they never really resolved this, and she just jokes with Chakotay at the end and everything's supposed to be okay again. Plus, the way she went from a mad woman bent on killing Ransom to all of a sudden trusting him when he said he wanted to work with her was so unbelievable. I just don't know why they wanted to, it was just ridiculous that she would trust Ransom all of a sudden. And I don't know why they want to build this Janeway-Chakotay feud, because first off, they didn't actually follow through with it. It was never resolved, nor did it lead to any character revelations. It wasn't necessary to the plot, it was just a waste of time. And most importantly, this storyline was already very successfully pulled off in the two-part episode Scorpion, which perfectly told the story where Janeway and Chakotay were at odds and they learned their feud was leading them nowhere and that they needed to put their differences aside and work together to accomplish what they needed to do. This was accomplished so well in Scorpion. I have no idea why they tried to repeat it here, but they did it so half-assed, it was just a mega waste of time. But as I said, I see what they were trying to accomplish here with this episode, and it was a really worthwhile story to have a show to show what would happen to a Starfleet vessel that was in Voyager's position but not equipped enough to handle it, and thus would have to go to extremes to survive. However, I believe it would have been far more effective if the Equinox crew came off as less of straight out villains and were more relatable. If they actually created doubt on who was right in the situation of Voyager or Equinox. However, as it stands, Voyager is clearly in the right and Equinox is clearly in the wrong, and that's not quite as interesting. Again, it seems like Part 1 was better at making the Equinox crew seem more relatable, as they were all having doubts and were, showing them to be suffering from PTSD. However, Part 2 made them straight out mustache twirling villains, and that did not work nearly as well. So now, let me get to one of the worst things about this episode, and ironically, it's not about the episode itself, but what came after. As at the end of the episode, the surviving members of the Equinox crew, which by the way, it seemed like there should have been a lot more of them, but whatever. Anyway, the surviving members of the Equinox crew were absorbed into Voyager's crew, and Janeway warned them they'd be on thin ice. And then we never saw any of them ever again. What a wasted opportunity. They could have done so many interesting storylines showing the Equinox crew integrate into Voyager. In fact, two of the characters were fairly well established already, so they could become recurring characters, but instead they ran away from serialization and turned this into a standalone episode and pretended it never happened again and just wiped the slate clean. What a shame, especially considering that later in the 6th season they had this reoccurring storyline of these Borg children survivors that they took on the ship. It might just be me, but personally I would have much rather have seen a storyline about the Equinox survivors than a Borg children survivors, but maybe that's just me. So my rating for Equinox out of 10 is a 6 good. There was a lot of great potential in this idea, however, they seemed to half-ass it and not do it quite the justice that it deserved. However, there were some great super intense moments in these episodes that really worked well, such as the game of cat and mouse between Janeway and Ransom, and the moral dilemma of Ransom doing what was best for his crew. However, as a whole, these episodes didn't quite come together as well as they could have, and episode 2 was not a great conclusion, as it completely changed directions and was inconsistent with the first part, and had ridiculous reasoning such as making the Doctor evil when he shouldn't have been, and having this unnecessary conflict between Janeway and Chakotay, which was a lesser version of one already done better in Scorpion. So that's it for my review of Equinox. If there's an episode from any of the 5 Star Trek series you'd like me to review, just leave a comment below with the episode you'd like me to review, but please only 1 episode request per person, and be advised it will be over a month before I can get to any new requests, and be sure to check out the rest of Star Trek Week as I continue to review episodes of Star Trek all week, and also be sure to check out my channel for many more reviews on shows like Game of Thrones and more, and be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all that. Thanks a lot for watching.